Good day. It is awesome to have you here today. I am in my office, and I guess this is our first of the new year, right, Kevin? So, welcome to Back Bay Mission's Moment with the Executive Director, and hopefully I have a lot to say, I think, but I will try to keep this short and sweet so that you can get all this information. I'm assuming that most of you have probably heard a lot of the stories recently revolving around an increase in homelessness all over our country. A lot of different stories I've heard, at least on National Public Radio and on the television. Some stories about homeless folks taking over the Tenderloin in San Francisco and how dangerous that is getting. And I believe there is a story that there's almost 70,000 people nightly on the streets of Los Angeles that are experiencing homelessness, and that's just the folks they count on the streets. And in Portland, Oregon, in a point in time survey, they counted almost 7,000 people living without a home on the streets of Portland. I am a big national public radio geek, and there were at least two stories between the New Orleans Public Radio and Mississippi Public Radio the last couple of days. And one of them in particular really hit me because it was a story about the business people in Minneapolis, the city I used to live in. They took the homeless situation into their own hands, and they fire hosed a group of homeless people in front of their businesses to get them to move. And in California, I also heard the story, the beginning of this week, of students at Berkeley, graduate students that are there actually doing their graduate degrees and getting stipends and getting paid, that they are paid so little by the University of Berkeley that they've been living in their cars because they can't afford to eat unless they live in their cars. They can't afford rent. And honestly, in my mind, as I hear these stories revolve, and there's been more than this, you know, this shouldn't be the way it is in what we're told is the richest country in the world, right? But in the face of all of this, there is one question that I ask is, who is my neighbor? You know, I get it. I work with people who are unsheltered and people living in poverty each and every day here in Biloxi. And I've been doing that for a number of years in other locations. And as somebody who has been a pastor and now works in the not-for-profit world, I don't receive necessarily a big paycheck. It's adequate. I have to budget. But I had a father who, growing up in poverty, was clear about not spending more than you make and putting something aside with each paycheck. But not everybody has had that kind of mentoring and that kind of parenting. And I, too, working with this community day in and day out, you know, I don't always want to acknowledge homelessness and poverty because I know I could be there and some of my family members have been there. And if I think way back to when I was a teen, I was there because I was couch hopping because being at home wasn't really a safe place for me. So yeah, it's a harsh reality, a very harsh reality. And in the face of homelessness and unshelteredness and poverty, I think we do need to ask ourselves each and every day, probably hour by hour, who is my neighbor? Our neighbor is anybody that is in the proximity of us, in our proximity, because we share that common humanity. And we're not only called to love those or care for those who are similar to us with a similar perspective, a political persuasion or economic setting, but we're called to love everybody, not just people with homes and not just people with jobs. And we are not necessarily called to, as human beings, I would say, to love just those who make us comfortable, but also those who make us uncomfortable. And honestly, we're all a bit uncomfortable when we see unsheltered people at street corners, in front of stores, asking us for something, for a handout, for help, right? But all of the Abrahamic religions, that includes Jews and Muslims and Christians, and I would say even humanists, everybody, according to these religious persuasions, everybody on this planet is our neighbor. We cannot get away from each other because we are in this together. So, having said that, I want to kind of delve into our topic for today, which Kevin encouraged me, who's behind our camera, that we talk about our town hall experience. And that really was a response to what Kevin was finding, who's our development associate, who saw on social media people complaining and vetching about homelessness, about unsheltered people, and about how frustrating it was here in the city of Biloxi. And so our intention was to get ahead of the curve, to have an open and honest dialogue, to invite these individuals to our campus, and to allow the community and business people to get it off their chest, to share what they need, to talk about homelessness and how frustrating it was for them. Well, it took on a life of its own, in a sense. On that evening, we had 8 service providers who talked about mental health, they talked about housing, they talked about physical health, they talked about, we even had our police chief here talking about how the police department handles people who are unsheltered. And we had a few unsheltered folks that were there to share their stories about barriers to housing and their well-being. And it was beautiful because we had about 70 people in attendance. And the goal was really not to just complain, right? Because we know we do a lot of complaining as human beings, but to move us toward a solution, to change the narrative, to paint an accurate picture of what it means to be unsheltered and homeless. And out of that meeting came another meeting with a small group of business folks. And then our next step is going to be having a second town hall meeting sometime in January or February at another location outside of Back Bay Mission to kind of take it into the community of Biloxi. And then kind of our third level and fourth level is to get it into other communities like Gulfport, like Ocean Springs, and the area around us, just to give people a forum to talk about their frustrations, and again, to change the narrative, to give accurate information, to dispel the myths around homelessness and poverty, right, which are so apparent and so clear right now in this interesting narrative that we have going on in our country. So I just encourage you to Google some of these stories, to put your own layer of understanding of homelessness and poverty on those stories, and then maybe to rethink what are the real barriers, what are the real challenges, and even for yourself, right, be solution focused and realize that everybody's our neighbor, right? There's nobody that's not our neighbor, which is really for me, that's a hard message, right? Because there are people sometimes I don't necessarily like, but I know that I need to say they're my neighbor. I may disagree, but I'm here to also be in community with them and help them in their journey, wherever that journey may take them. So rather than going into all the barriers, which might be another episode down the road, barriers to housing or barriers to people getting off the streets, to finding shelter, barriers out of poverty, I think it's just important to just consider this and consider the fact that we're neighbors. And here at Back Bay Mission, we're really trying to do something about it. I would love for there to be in town halls in every community in Mississippi and beyond, because I think it's important that we communicate together as human beings, especially in our incredibly divided world. So we just wanted to let you know what we're doing here at Back Bay to try to make a difference with the system, right, that keeps people in poverty and keeps people homeless, to try to lift people up and lift them out. So thank you for joining me today. I hope all is well with you in this new year, 2023. Kind of never thought I'd be at this point, right? And we don't know what life brings us. Never thought I'd be out of, quote, pastoral ministry and back into the not-for-profit world after spending the majority of my life in the not-for-profit world. But I'm really, really grateful, because what we do here is really a ministry that I see that connects with all three Abrahamic faiths, right? It's not just Christian, not just Jewish. It's not just Muslim, because they all say take care of your neighbor, take care of those who are poor and living in poverty. But it's really the human thing to do, and it's a part of our humanitarian movement. So get on board, be a part of the change that you want to see in the world, and thank you for joining me today. And thanks, Kevin, for always being behind the camera. Have a great day.